I have been puzzling the last year or two in some of the work I've been doing about the extent to which gender has apparently insinuated itself into mainstream economics. And this talk specifically looks at multinational corporations and the way in which they have seemingly embraced feminism and have made it part of their calculus and have used it, but also embraced it as something that is beneficial for what corporations want to accomplish under the general label of corporate social responsibility. If you look at if you read the business pages these days, some of you may have actually encountered the recent spat between Uber and UN Women. Right? There was a big announcement that Uber and UN Women are going to enter a partnership, and they're going to ensure that within the next whatever, there's always a goal, a date, and then a number, that's usually the millions, and then they will empower women together. This lasted about 3 days. After 3 days, the head of UN Women had to come out and said, we didn't actually mean it, kind of reacting to the kind of criticism that UN Women then encountered, specifically from unions who said, you are trying to promote the flexibilization of women's labor. In essence, what Uber is doing is precisely the problem, and so UN Women stepped back. They don't say that's why they did it. They said there wasn't really ever that kind of a detail of an agreement. But clearly that relationship is fraught. The relationship between organizations such as UN Women, who stand for the promotion of women's rights, for women's empowerment, for eliminating subordination and all of those good things on the one hand, and of corporations on the other hand, who are in the business of making money, but also claim they want to do that in a sustainable way. But if we look around, you have all encountered these. There's Nike promoting the girl effect. There's Goldman Sachs claiming they want 10,000 women, and they want to train 10,000 women, and they do that in partnership with all kinds of business schools and universities. There's Coca-Cola, who has its 5 by 20 initiative, which promises economic empowerment of 5 million women entrepreneurs in their value chain by 2020. There's Kraft and Unilever and their project Laserbeam, which is geared towards eradicating child nutrition. Yves Saint Laurent has a long-standing interest in promoting gender equality. It's probably actually one of the more feminist organizations. Somebody needs to look closer at them, but that's a surface kind of observation. They also have a compact with UN Women on combating violence against women. And then there's, of course, the famous Uber story. What is new about this? Corporate social responsibility is new in the sense that for the first time, multinational corporations are actually suggesting that doing good, promoting the common good, is entirely compatible with their business models. Indeed, they're suggesting this is a win-win situation, and promoting good is something that they make part of their regular business plans. So it's no longer the head of the corporation has a pet project, giving money to the local high school or to a museum, to something that is typically not related to the corporation at all, but instead social responsibility can actually be promoted through what the corporation does, and it will achieve a dual goal of advancing both the private gain of the corporation and also the public good. So this is the ideology of gender equality is good for business, gender equality is smart economics that I talked about when I talked about the World Bank a couple of months ago. It's very different from what feminists have been saying. The arguments about nimble fingers make good workers and being able to pay women less is something that actually promotes a globalized economy and helps regain put capitalism back on track so that the declining rate of profit will be reversed. It's very different also from the arguments that feminists had put forward about modernization and globalization, the way in which modernization in particular tends to marginalize women, in particular in rural environments. So these are in a sense, they are radical suggestions. Yet the wisdom increasingly is precisely capitalism is good for women, multinational corporations are good for women, expanding globalization is good for women. So the feminist literature on this has always been very, very critical for the most part, right? And feminists have kind of thrown up their hands in despair and saying, well, feminism has been co-opted. So we have now the proliferation of various labels to typify this kind of feminism: market feminism, free market feminism, hegemonic feminism, imperial feminism, managerial feminism, transnational business feminism, governance feminism, post-feminism, full feminism, as opposed to real feminism, and I think the malaise really, Nancy Fraser in a recent article I think really expressed that most cogently in my mind, and this particular sentence captures it for me most vividly. She said, feminism has spawned a neoliberal bastard, a strange shadowy version of itself, an uncanny double that it can neither simply embrace nor wholly disavow. And I think this is precisely kind of this uncomfortable position where we find ourselves in. On the one hand, we know some of these forms of liberalization are actually good for women, right? And enabling women to make money and all of those things and increasing their income. Yet on the other hand, we also know that this promotes structures that are deeply exploitative and that reproduce power relationships based on class in particular, that ultimately a lot of feminist activism has actually fought against. So you know, that's the diagnosis, and this is in a sense my starting point. I was asking myself, well, is this then where we stop? Is there anything else that can be said about these projects of feminist cooptation that agencies engage in? And Fraser makes another really, really important point, and I kind of use that as my kickoff. Fraser says we cannot think of feminism as disembedded in history, which to me then means also we cannot think of feminism as something that is itself dissociated from the larger global political economy that is out there. So if we see today a co-optation of feminism, then we need to read feminism in the context of the contemporary political economy, and it seems to me that contemporary political economy is, of course, characterized by neoliberalism, by the crisis of neoliberalism, the multiple crises of neoliberalism that include a financial crisis, that include an ecological crisis, and that also include a care crisis. And that these various crises have also begun to destabilize some of the neoliberal certainties that certainly existed in the 1980s. Now, given this, I would like to propose to you that rather than thinking about feminism having been neoliberalized and now totally absorbed into a neoliberal political economy, we maybe should be looking at what exactly those processes of the neoliberalization of feminism entail and what they entail empirically. And as we do so, it seems to me it also becomes important then to look at where is that neoliberalization of feminism incomplete? Where does this neoliberalization of feminism leave gaps and openings? And where does it produce contradictions? And if it produces these kind of contradictions, are there openings in the neoliberalization of feminism towards a reappropriation of certain types or certain elements of its technologies and maybe or even of its rationalities for more progressive purposes? So in a sense, that's my starting point. And what I'd like to do this afternoon is I'd like to walk you through two corporate women's empowerment projects with precisely these questions in mind. The two projects are first Unilever's Shakti project, and the second one is one that's financed by Levi-Strauss and Company, and it's called the Her Project. The projects are both projects by consumer products companies. So we are in the realm here of not services, but manufacturing for the most part. They're different in the sense that the Unilever project focuses on the marketing of its products, whereas the Levi-Strauss project focuses on supply chains and on managing its supply chains. Let me start with the Shakti project first. Some of you may have heard about this project. This has actually gotten quite a bit of publicity, in particular in business school contexts where it is celebrated as the prototype of what is known as bottom of the pyramid marketing. The idea is that there's a huge market of the poor, which is not being serviced right now, but that market of the poor is an extremely rich market, and it is one that those who will be able to corner the market will, in a sense, in the future, have those people as customers that they can count on. The Shakti project was set up with support of the International Finance Corporation and several local governments in India. The government of Andhra Pradesh was involved in that, in addition to various local governments and local NGOs that also supported the project. The purpose of the project was to create a distribution network for Unilever products. So Unilever sought to create this network of what they call Shakti Amma, empowered mothers, or Shakti entrepreneurs, as they call them also, who are basically direct marketing Unilever products in the villages of India. It's a rural focused project. The starting point is there is no distribution network there. It's a context of high illiteracy where advertising doesn't work particularly well, and where the physical infrastructure is such that it is very difficult to actually distribute goods. And this is actually, it's run by Hindustan Lever, which is the Indian subsidiary of Unilever. So the way in which the project is set up and also discussed in the press, there was a nice article that The Economist did on the project, and The Economist basically claims that Unilever, with this project and because of this project, is winning the race against Procter & Gamble for the next billion shoppers. Unilever now has a network of close to 50,000 Shakti Amma in India. They're expanding the network to Bangladesh and Pakistan. They know this works. They know it's helping them tremendously to lock in this particular market. So what are they doing here? They're not just any longer marketing to women, which of course companies have long done. They're now also marketing through women, and they're using women in order to pursue their own profit while claiming to also make a contribution to the public by producing a public good in the sense of giving these women income. I would suggest to you that at the bottom of this is a neoliberal governmentality. It's neoliberal in the sense that there is an effort here to create subjectivities to enable these women and give them a capacity to aspire, is how Appadurai has called that. To succeed financially through entrepreneurship, to want to become industrious and improve themselves. This is the one element of this governmentality. It's the creation of subjectivities. On the other hand, there's also a reformulation of what the public good actually means that is going on here. The Shakti Amma are seen to be messengers of hygiene, of hand washing, of personal care, of improving community health. So by marketing Unilever healthcare products, there is a public health effect that is seen to result from this. Now, I was lucky enough that this particular project, actually, there's an independent evaluation that I found online of this. This is some students at a university in the UK, and I can't remember what it was. But they were from India, and they actually poked around in these villages and wrote up this really interesting long summary of their research. I don't think it ever got formally published anywhere. It's a working paper and on some website. And drawing from this independent evaluation, I would suggest the following insights to you. And the question we're asking ourselves here is, so what is the meaning of empowerment in this context? It strikes me from looking at the evaluation of these two students, Tekudan and Tandon, is that one could distinguish between three types of empowerment. Because the meaning empowerment is itself a relatively contested matter, and I think we could have a different discussion on that term. But there is, on the one hand, a private empowerment, right? These two students are suggesting that they found that there was a very clear, significant increase in cash income of households of Shakti Amma. They almost doubled their income. They also found that the Shakti Amma, for the most part, said they had increased self-confidence, that they felt that they were more respected in the community, and that they, in general, had gotten a lot more recognition. So clearly, there is something that is happening there that all of us could agree is a good thing. In the household, if you go up kind of a level, from that individual level to the level of the household, the issue became a little more ambiguous. On the one hand, of course, as I already said, there was an increase in household income. But the students also found that, for the most part, the men were actually quite involved in these businesses, right? And particular because there's in many villages, a strong bias against women's mobility beyond a certain range of the village. They felt it was necessary for the men to be involved. And this is, of course, also something that we have seen in microcredit projects and has been documented there, that when projects and businesses grow, very often men get involved in the household and the power dynamics around this change quite extensively. Now, moving up to the more public or community level of what was happening there, the impacts actually become quite problematic. First, what these students found is that there's the production of a monopoly of Unilever products in those villages. They're competing against traditional soap makers, for example, who found themselves increasingly displaced by the influx of international products. And one could also say more broadly, there's actually a displacement of other kinds of competitors. So Unilever becomes the brand to shop for. On the issue of health and hygiene impacts, they recount a very interesting story. Unilever apparently tried to roll out this project in Kerala, and local leaders there resisted. They said they didn't want this. If the local authorities really were interested in promoting health locally, they said they should focus on clean water and on getting access, reliable access to clean water. They did not need Lifebuoy soap, they needed water, is what they insisted on, and this whole movement actually kept the project out of this particular region. In the regions where the project was introduced, Unilever actually used local solidarity groups in order to identify women that would want to be Shakti Amma, and those Shakti Amma would then sell to their group members on preferential terms. This was kind of their entry to it. So in a sense, they used local solidarities in order to promote these competitive, individualistic, this competitive, individualistic scheme. The problem that the students here found was that increasingly over time, this seemed to put a tremendous strain on these solidarity groups, because more and more women actually entered the scheme and wanted to become Shakti Amma, so they started to compete against each other. So what previously were solidarity groups now came to be torn apart. And then finally, one could ask questions about the assortment of products that the Shakti Amma sold. On the one hand, yes, there's Lifebuoy soap, but Lifebuoy soap in the West, there has been a lot of activism around the antibacterial agent in Lifebuoy soap, and Unilever actually has removed that from its products in the West. It's still in the product in India that's sold by Hindustan Lever. Moreover, the Shakti Amma, of course, are also marketing products such as Light and Lovely, its skin whitening product, with the argument that whiter skins make women feel better about themselves, and this is a form of empowerment. Mm-hmm. So there is a clear redefinition of what is the public good that is involved in infusing these corporate logics into a local, what one could call a contemporary development project, right? That draws on these neoliberal mechanisms. So there's plenty of wrong with this project, with this Unilever's neoliberalization of feminism. But I'd like to keep also in mind, with all that's wrong there has been an improvement in the kind of income that is earned by households in which the Shakti Amma, of which the Shakti Amma are members. And I think we cannot entirely just reject that and act as if it is not happening. There's clearly something about the liberal feminism that is at display here that works, right? So let me then move on to the second project. The second project is financed by Levi-Strauss and Company. It's called the HER project, H-E-R project, where HER stands for Health Enables Returns. So there's already the logic, the win-win logic is signaled here already. This is a project that is very much embedded in the new international division of labor, the fact that a lot of assembly work has been outsourced to the South. Levi-Strauss and Company, I mean, some of you who are old enough like me, we remember the times when jeans basically meant Levi-Strauss and there wasn't anything else. This was it in the 1980s. But Levi-Strauss, like other garment manufacturers, subcontracted and moved a lot of its production overseas. Levi-Strauss is a family-owned company, and in the comparison of things, it's a company that is relatively more benign. It's a strongly unionized company. It's a company that has always wanted to work with its unions. And in terms of corporate social responsibility movement, it's actually been a leader. So Levi-Strauss was the first company in the garment field in the US that introduced a code of conduct for its subcontractors in the early 1990s. It also was among the first in 2005 to make public the list of their suppliers, which has been a demand from NGOs and unions for a long time in order to be able to hold accountable. And then in 2011, it introduced a new management, a mechanism for supply chain management, which they call supply chain engagement, in which they say we want to no longer be the people who surveil and discipline our suppliers, but rather we want to work with our suppliers and engage with them and make them kind of active participants in creating a culture of responsible action and responsible attitudes towards our workers. And the HER project is very much part of this. The HER project, what the HER project does is it pairs local NGOs with subcontractors, garment subcontractors in various, mostly newly emerging economies around the world, with the purpose of increasing healthcare and health services among garment workers. And these NGOs actually directly work in the garment factories. So Levi-Strauss encourages its suppliers to participate in that. In fact, there's even competition as to who can participate in the project. It's a competitive way of getting access to it, and there's quite a bit of demand and interest on the part of suppliers in this project. The project is supported by the Levi-Strauss Foundation, so it's the nonprofit arm of Levi-Strauss, and by the Swedish International Development Cooperation Agency, SIDA. So what they actually do in these projects is they teach garment workers about sexual and reproductive health, about nutrition, about hygiene, about pre- and postnatal care, about infectious diseases, about sexual harassment, about violence against women. Again, the logic is very much a win-win type of situation. There is a return on investment study that was conducted in Egypt, and the study found that for every $4, the study suggested a return of $4 for every dollar invested in this project as a result of reduced absenteeism and also as a result of reduced turnover. There's again a neoliberal governmentality involved in terms of the production of certain subjectivities, right? So the idea is a worker needs to also take care of themselves to be a productive worker. They need to generate, the purpose is to generate health awareness in the workplace. So what again does that mean with regard to empowerment? Let me go through these different levels of empowerment again. And I think what one can again say, this is the target is the individual. It's empowering the individual through information. There's a benefit clearly immediately having to do with reduction of disease. And the information is often very, I find in these development projects, there's often a real obsession about sanitary pads and menstruation, right? And this one has that also, right? I mean, that these garment workers just don't know that you should be using sanitary pads and not the refuse from the garment factory, which is full of mold and whatnot, and people get sick with that and so on. And they make an issue out of that these are rural women and they are out of their normal environment, and so the older women can't teach them about how you actually do these things, and so you need these projects, right? And somehow this is going to improve their health situation in general. And there's some clear advantages that this works. What's interesting when you look at this project in particular is that it addresses some real issues in contemporary patriarchy in the household having to do with domestic violence. Right? And so in that sense, I think there is the project actually does not just stay at the level of the individual, but addresses certain structural issues. Even at the level of the factory and of society, it engages with sexual harassment. But what I actually find most interesting about this project is its methodology. And its methodology is not a one-on-one teaching, but it actually uses peer-to-peer teaching. And it involves the creation of groups. And the factories actually set aside time during the workday in which these groups can meet. So the group formation in itself, I think, has the possibility of valorizing other forms of knowledge. And it also, and the project does that also specifically, entails the creation of leadership skills. And there's even leaders that are being trained, and people are being trained to take on a lead on some of these issues. Here's the quote of a peer educator from Egypt who says the following: "This project provided us with knowledge, which gave us power. It enhanced our self-confidence and built more trust between us and other workers." So the logic here seems to me is quite different from the entrepreneurial logic in the first project. Here there's really a creation of potential solidarities. Now these solidarities are all based around women's health, right? And they're not based around let's negotiate higher wages. And to some extent one could even think of these groups as in competition with unions, because they fulfill a certain need of exchanging with each other. Yet it seems to me that in terms of the logic does not stay purely neoliberal in this instance, to the extent that it moves beyond the idea that you have to responsibilize individuals to take care of themselves, and you instead generate group solidarities that make possible other kinds of interpretations. Okay. Let me move towards my general assessment and conclusion. I have used this term neoliberalization, neoliberalism quite liberally, if I can say that, without giving you a definition. And I think it's necessary to actually think of neoliberalism a little more closely, because neoliberalism is this very, very big term that we use now instead of globalization or capitalism, or it's the big hammer that hammers everything. I think it's necessary to distinguish at least three aspects of what neoliberalism is. Neoliberalism, first, is a political program. It's a political program that we typically associate with Margaret Thatcher, Ronald Reagan, the Bretton Woods institutions, structural adjustment, and those kinds of things. In that sense, it involves privatization, reduction of the welfare state, and things of that nature. Neoliberalism also is an ideology. It's an ideology that is mostly associated with the writings of people like Hayek and Friedman. And it's, again, an ideology that, that valorizes the private, that valorizes the market, and puts the market central in as central methodology of veridiction, if I can use that word. It's a Foucauldian word, but it's using the market to tell you what's the right thing to do, essentially. But then neoliberalism also is a rationality, and it's a rationality to govern. And here, this is the Foucauldian sense of neoliberalism. And I've used in much of what I have talked about this afternoon, I've actually used neoliberalism mostly in that sense. So it's a rationality of government that produces subjectivities that are responsible subjectivities that self-discipline in order to adjust themselves to what is a political project that is out there. It is technology of government that also has, it is a form of governance that also uses a particular technology, and that technology, more than anything, is the market. Okay. Now, if you look at both the Shakti project and the Her project, through the lens of these different understandings of neoliberalism, there's clearly a focus on the individual. There's a focus, on the one hand, on the rural women as entrepreneurs and potential entrepreneurs. On the other hand, of women workers as individuals with health needs. There's also an understanding that the responsibility to fulfill these needs are both with the individual, but also with the corporation. So the corporation itself becomes this entity, this agent, that takes paternalistic responsibility towards its workers and towards its suppliers. The emphasis is on individual empowerment by providing income and providing health, and the understanding is that the market will arbiter certainly the success of the Shakti Amma, if not of the worker. There is also a politics behind this, though. And it seems to me the fact that these two different projects are so different has to do, among other things, with what they are. The first project involves a competition of multinational corporations for market share. And the Shakti Amma becomes a tool in that competition. The second project, seems to me, is involved in a different kind of power relation. You have here activists, NGOs, who over the years have been engaging with corporations and have been criticizing labor relations in supplier factories. And her project, I think, is embedded in this kind of a discourse, and the fact that we are seeing this opening, in a sense, in the neoliberal technology that is being applied to them, has in part to do with the fact that these struggles resonate into this particular solution that is being provided. Okay, let me conclude. The suggestion that I would like to leave with you is that I think it would be wise for feminist scholars to not just take the cooptation of feminism by neoliberalism as a fait accompli, but to instead study it in its empirical detail. I think it's very clear and transparently clear to me that liberal feminism is beautifully compatible with neoliberalism. Right? And maybe feminism always has been compatible with liberalism. And there's a kind of this discussion going on as to what has been hegemonic among feminists. Nancy Fraser kind of bemoans the fact that the radical feminism has disappeared and has been co-opted, but in a sense, the liberal feminism has always been hegemonic. So even in the 1960s and 1970s, or 1970s, 1980s, that certainly in this country, that was the hegemonic discourse. And so I think it's dangerous to be nostalgic for the old feminism and to see that nostalgia as separated from, well, to think that there is a pure feminism that one can go back to. I don't think feminism is ever pure and is ever unpolluted from the political environment and the political economy in which it is embedded. So today when we talk about a market feminism and a neoliberal feminism, it's the kind of feminism that is in sync, I think, with our times. Which doesn't mean that we should not be critical of that kind of feminism. It also, and in particular, I think, we should not fall into a sentiment of despair. Even that kind of feminism is never total. There are openings very clearly with regard to class, when neoliberalization is paired with more old-fashioned collective bargaining type of logics, which we find also, even if they are reformulated in the Levi-Strauss case, is stakeholder engagement. It's a new language, yet there's a certain logic there. And certainly also where social movements have had an impact, and we need to celebrate these impacts, I think, rather than being only critical and minimize them, because I think they disappear if we do that. So neoliberalization of feminism is never total, and I think even if it seems total, as in the Shakti project, we should be looking for contradictions and the impacts that it may have, maybe at different levels than at the structural level. But then what are structures if they are not the agglomeration of individual agency? Right, Paul? Let me stop here. Thank you very much.
Thank you for a really a marvelous overview of these issues. And I was wondering if there isn't also some new ways of bringing together this issue and highlighting some of the alternative ways of thinking about the way the world is developing by looking at some of the writings in the development anthropologists like Tanya Lee and David Moss, who are arguing that the problem with Foucault's approach is that there's a tendency that Foucault tends to read governmentality onto the way intended actions towards governmentality work out, rather than ask the question, what actually happens on the ground? And both David Moss and Tanya Lee are anthropologists who have concluded that we need to understand that policy making in itself is a political action, whether it's around development questions and corporations or anything, that there are political pressures that come up with the public statements about the intentions of projects, like these 2 projects you talked about, or policies or anything. But then they started following those official policies out into the field and discovered that in the field there was a lot of different things happening than were supposed to be happening, according to the statements of purpose of various projects and policies. So that, and that's where I think the new interest in decolonialism and post-colonial thinking, might be useful for bringing together, trying to think about the way in which people around the world are trying to claim some of their own voice, out of their own history, with their own cultural assumptions, whether we like them or not. But this tension between the neoliberal notion of a global project and local searches for one's own local interpretations and voice. So I think bringing together the transnational, the decolonial, the post-colonial, and then this development anthropology to the work you're doing might be a very interesting way to move a little further in the question that you pose at the end, that how do we understand more than just what people think is going to happen.
I agree 100%. In a sense, I think of this particular paper as a first step. And what really needs to happen is precisely this detailed empirical investigation. So I'm not going to do it, frankly, right? Because I have some other projects going on right now. But I've been desperately looking for PhD students who are brave enough to do this. I think this is really, really important work that needs to be done. And the evaluation of those 2 students that I cited, it's honestly the only thing that I found on through long searches on the web that was not the corporate message. The corporate message is out there, strong and loud and beautiful, and in beautiful brochures and nicely done and so on. But it's just the same thing over and over and over again. And to actually, this is, this is in a sense, I really think of it as a new phase in gender and development. So we have gone from WIT to GAT to gender mainstreaming, and now we have the public-private partnerships. And what they're doing in many instances, that whole history of discussing gender is just entirely off the table. It's as if it had never happened. They are reinventing the wheel, and they are reinventing it in their very own ways by focusing on women entrepreneurs, right? So it's the individual and the woman that needs the intervention, that there is power relationships, that gender means something different than women and men. It's as if that discussion had never been had. And I think really there's just a desperate need to go out there, because this is becoming the standard. It's not something unusual in the development world. The whole development community is moving in that direction. The World Bank has now firmly integrated the International Finance Corporation into its main operations, because the understanding is public-private partnerships are the future. You do anything anywhere, it's all, where's the private sector? Have you asked the private sector? That private sector might be able to help you. It's become the standard response. So I think we're seeing really a new way of doing development. And, we need to get involved in talking about what is happening there, because a lot of what is happening is really quite god-awful. You know, I mean, in particular, these bottom of the pyramid marketing. The Coca-Cola thing is a very similar project. It's we are going to create women entrepreneurs in our supply chains, and that is going to be development. So I agree with you 100%, and that's I think I mean it's my limit certainly of not having the local expertise and not taking the time hanging out in some of these communities. But I think we need to get some students who really, you know how to do this and know how to hang out in. That these are not easy sites to hang out in. You know, this is not going to the Capitol and interviewing a few people. I mean, it's a matter of really immersing themselves. So yeah, thank you very much. I agree 100%. Yes.
Could I just ask a question about another strand in IP that I think is growing, and particularly growing in Germany, Andreas Nohlke and others, and that's the varieties of capitalism, because I'm very struck by the growth of Southern capitalism, the growth of state-owned enterprises, particularly oil companies, etc. And in your case, at least one of the examples was a more, whatever, Muslim state. And I wonder if some of those things matter in terms of the type of corporate social responsibility that might be acceptable. So I think it's actually increasingly complicated given the growth of Southern capitalisms.
You know, Tim, I don't think I have any answer to that. That's a really fascinating question. I mean, and because in a sense you're asking, I mean, or we also need to differentiate the corporations, right? So not every corporation or every multinational is like the other, and they certainly have cultures, and they're huge enough. So I take that as a really interesting suggestion, and I'm sure you're onto something like that, and I'm sure the business school people are actually probably talking about that. So it's a matter of also exposing ourselves to that literature a little bit more. Yeah.
I want to encourage students, interns, anybody sitting here who does not feel like they have the level of knowledge and engagement that Jane and Tim do with this, but actually have
professors
thoughts.
for 30 years, so don't expect.
But you can have very different kind of questions, and it is very good to go ahead and ask them. So,
And any question is good. There's no such thing as a bad question.
Don't you hate being put on the spot?
I do have some student questions, but I do have a question while you're formulating it.
So thank you very much for your very informative and engaging talk. I had a couple of comments, and I'm going to try and keep them brief, which is very hard for me once I start talking. The first is sort of as an economist, hearing you talk about these two projects was fascinating, because the sort of entry point for an economist would have been looking at the market structure in both of the industries you were talking about. And for the Levi-Strauss one, they're just concentrating on changing relations within the supply chain. So it's just a matter of supply, and it's essentially about getting higher productivity workers. They're giving a public good by addressing healthcare concerns that may have sort of empowerment ramifications that go beyond the level of the individual worker. But those, again, have productivity implications for healthcare if you're thinking of sort of, lower absenteeism, et cetera. But it's just supply. What's fascinating in the Shakti-Amma case is that it's about market penetration, and it's about both demand and supply. You're creating demand in a rural market infrastructure where there isn't any, or it's not easy to penetrate. There actually is very clearly market structures in the rural economy within India, but how to get into that market, especially as a large multinational corporation, is really unclear. But you're also creating, you're also addressing supply issues too. So it's a supply and demand issue, sort of intertwined. So that was sort of the economist comment, which didn't have a good question. My separate question, which was I was really interested in the Shakti-Amma case, was whether the review of the intervention said anything about caste or religion dynamics within the rural economy within India, because it would be very interesting, especially if you're thinking about empowerment and backlash, if that is going on in the rural sector where your lowest caste, your scheduled tribe, scheduled caste, are being empowered, my impression is you will see extreme violence reaction to that. So I doubt it is, and especially, but I was really interested if the review said anything about that dynamic. I'll stop there. Sorry.
Yes, thank you. But on the second question, I would have to look at the review again. It was not a central thing, the caste issue, but I entirely see what you're saying. Yeah, it's clearly an issue. You know, on the first issue, I love your framing. You know, you just have put it to an economist, and they have this totally different framing. But I've also wondered, you know, whether the fact that there's these very different logics. I mean, you have, on the one hand, the logic of the Shakti-Amma is all about consumption. It's all about consumption. So the in is, you know, how do I produce more consumers? And the logic of intervention could also be, you know, so you expand what consumers can buy, or you reduce that, right? And so the power, in a sense, lies with the consumer, which to me, you know, there's a logic, a political logic there as to how would you interfere with this. And in a sense, I always wonder that the consumer logic is often kind of the neoliberal logic, you know, because we rely on the individual consumer to conduct themselves differently, as opposed to the class logic that underlies the Levi-Strauss project. You know, it's about workers in a factory, and how do those workers take advantage or reorganize their working relations. And so the power relations are different here, and you have, you know, if you have unions involved, and you have NGOs involved that work for workers as a class, right, as opposed to individuals. At least there's a logic behind that in some way. And so in terms of, you know, thinking about how to intervene in a global political economy, I'm not entirely sure. I'm totally sticking my neck out here, but it seems to me there's these two very different logics, and I think there are different levels of power associated with them, and different levels of potentially being useful or being effective. You know, consumption is such an interesting thing, because it's also such a women's thing. You know, it's what the women do, and they buy, and they are the ones that go to the store. It's such a feminized space, and in a way, we've always thought of that as something that should be organized. I mean, the consumer rights movements or consumer reports and so on, and you know, you feel like you can actually do something and be active there. Yet, in a sense, it's a very individualized space that is very hard to disrupt, even in consumer cooperatives or consumer movements that exist. Whereas the production spaces, I mean, it's associated so much more masculine in a way, even though that, you know, we have now all these women who are always had actually women who are factory workers, but it's kind of the organizing logic that becomes possible there. I retranslated it again into politics. I'm sorry, but your distinction kind of brought that association for me.
Anybody else? Well, I'm not a student, so
I'll
wait till students.
No, please go ahead. Just introduce yourself, please.
No, I mean, the whole time you've been thinking about... I'm sorry. My name is Françoise Carré. I'm from the Center for Social Policy here in the Public Policy Graduate School. The whole time you've been talking about the Levi-Strauss case, I've been trying to puzzle this one out, because it made me think, I mean, is it really neoliberal? Because, I mean, in one sense, you can say, well, here's a private solution for a public good problem, which is public health. So this is, no, they intervene partly because the country is not providing these women with enough of what they need to remain healthy. So in that sense, it could be termed neoliberal. On the other hand, they're stepping in very much in the way that welfare capitalists stepped in the early days before New Deal, before the full elaboration and construction of the welfare state. And so none of this has much to do with any thinking on feminism, but it's got a lot to do with thinking about how capitalism organizes itself. And so, I mean, it might make feminists feel better if they think of this as not necessarily a neoliberal thing. So that's why I've been puzzling with this, and I don't know where to go with it. But it's a liberal. Well, it's a welfare capitalist kind of thing that could turn into something else, because they don't intend to stay forever in that role.
Yes.
I mean, the question is, who's going to pick it up after
That's true.
Could also be interpreted as a previous iteration of market feminism, just not neoliberal market feminism. You take both those words as having distinct historical contexts. And we're looking at neoliberal feminism in this talk, but there are previous forms of market feminism in different moments. I think that's always been a part of influencing that. And I think that what you're saying, like this Levi's project, to me is much more of this like paternalist market and not,
And if I just may add, I mean, it's tricky, because if you try to help women, you're going to do something around something that has to do with social welfare, right? So they went to health because it seemed non-controversial. But it ends up having them step in and take responsibility for workers, whereas the point of neoliberalism is that you're supposed to be footloose and sever continuous, steady relationship with anybody.
Right. You know, I hear you entirely, and I think that would be a totally justified interpretation. You get back to what is neoliberalism, and I guess in that Foucauldian sense, I used it. I think I use it more in the Foucauldian sense in this particular paper, where I see a certain way of governing that searches itself. So it's not like these workers organized and came to the company and said, there's health problems and you need to intervene there, but it's the company seeking to precisely make the workers more productive and also counteract bad publicity internationally by going on that bandwagon of doing gender equality work in a particular form, right? That involves an engagement and making their suppliers responsible and making the individuals more responsible and so on. So but it's a matter of interpretation, and I can see entirely what you're saying here. I mean, that makes sense.
I think, picking up on Tim's point about Southern corporations, I have a PhD student here who's working on corporate social responsibility in the big chaeballs in South Korea. And it's very interesting that they are really big on supporting the environment, but when they talk about trying to make labor have more opportunities and everything, but they are so embedded in their system of having women be predominantly temporary workers and skilled women. As soon as they have a baby, 73% of them quit their job and don't go back till 10 years, 15 years later in very different conditions, so that their approach to labor and gender is embedded in the sexual division of labor that is in both Japan and South Korea, wherein salaried workers, males, work till 10, 11 at night, and the housework and the children and the reproductive work is done primarily by stay-at-home moms. So it's interesting there. These are very modern corporations, Samsung, all these things, but they are not in their corporate social responsibility actually addressing any of the need to fundamentally reorganize the gender division of labor.
And this is really interesting to me. I mean, because there's also within the corporations, you know, you have typically, it's interesting to see where this stuff is located. So there is gender talk in the human resources department, and that very often focuses on women in the higher echelons, you know, and they can't get them quite up there. And then there's the corporate social responsibility, which is very often, it's not considered to be human resources issues. That's very often actually very close to the center of the corporation, like the big PR and the heads of the corporations are involved in that. And it's considered to be something entirely different, right? And the logics, I'm wondering, I mean, you bring up something, you know, to what extent these programs are actually anchored in national discourses or national political activities that are going on there. So when you have Unilever in the UK, I'm sure, you know, there the talk is about bringing women into the business, bringing them up in the hierarchy internally. Whereas, you know, when you are in India, it's a different argument, certainly from the perspective of the North. So there's a certain colonial element to this also, as to, you know, how you should be framing women. And you know, interesting else, I was looking, I don't have a good sense of that, and I'm not sure the data are very good, but if you look at the public-private partnerships that are out there, the vast majority seem to be in the area of health, followed by environment, and then gender issues are actually relatively further down in that hierarchy, although, of course, health issues very often get mixed in with gender issues. But yeah, environment is a much cleaner thing for corporations to get involved in. You know, you can be, I don't know, I don't think it's as political. I think that I wouldn't be surprised if this Uber spat is going to generate some backlash in terms of, do corporations really want to get involved in the gender issue? Because there is, I don't know, it sounds to me like a dangerous engagement, frankly, because there's potential for really messing that up in different ways. Now, are they going to get the criticism? I don't know. You know, it's certainly out there. The Clinton Foundation is doing gender. You know, everybody's doing gender. It's out there. What's his name? Bill Gates. Gates Foundation is heavily into it. So it's become a very mainstream thing to do. It's not gender. It's women, actually. I should do. Yeah, exactly.